And that's the gist of it. And it's so critical for people to realize that it's almost like a confirmation bias. If you think you're a victim, you will find everything in your daily life that confirms that theory. Mm-hmm. It's like when you drive to work and you throw your hands up because you hit that red light every day and you're like, man, I always hit this red light. You actually don't. But when that light is green, you don't even notice it. You're listening to the Born Primitive podcast. We appreciate everybody tuning in. This is an exciting moment for us. This is the official launch of the Born Primitive podcast. We've been talking about this for a long time, and we finally pulled the trigger on it. So, for those that don't know us, we are Born Primitive. We're an apparel brand coming up on our 10-year anniversary. So we'll get into the backstory of the brand probably in future episodes. But started in fitness apparel and have evolved into athleisure and outdoor and tactical apparel, and have a shoe coming in a couple weeks. So we're stoked on it. The intent of this podcast is we want to add value to your lives in all different types of disciplines, whether that's human performance, being a family man, wellness, being an entrepreneur, and everything in between. So we're going to try to go find guests that are have achieved success in their discipline, and interview them and try to extract that common thread of what made them successful. So before we get into our first topic, I want to kick it over to my co-host, Tony Strasiser. Tone, thanks for joining me. And why don't you give the listeners a quick rundown of who you are?
Yeah, of course. Tony Strasiser from Southwest Pennsylvania, Yinzer, about an hour outside of Pittsburgh. Grew up on a 200-acre farm in the middle of nowhere. Pastures, we grew up with 8 to 10 beef cattle, as well as some goats, a lot of dogs, a lot of cats. Sports were kind of our livelihood, me and my two brothers growing up. Ended up playing baseball at West Virginia University in the Big 12. And I guess practicing might have been a better term for me to use, as in my 3 years there, battled with a back surgery, a broken ankle. So saw the field some, but not a significant amount. Was majoring in biology while I was at West Virginia, with the plans on eventually going to med school. Some things shuffled around there. I was working in actually like human performance right out of college, and then kind of almost stumbled into Born Primitive, which that could be its whole own podcast. Is the first time you and I sat down across from a table similar to this. And you kind of just told me, hey man, we have no salaried positions right now. We're up and coming, but if you want to work in the warehouse, I got a spot for you there. So that was a little over 4 years now that kicked off. And yeah, now we're here now. And there's a little side story there too, where 4 months after I started in the warehouse, you and I actually riffed out at the gym table talking about the potential of doing a podcast. So sitting here, man, it's a cool feeling. It's been a while. It only took us 4 years to finally put it together.
Yeah. And I do think we'll dedicate an episode to what you've done here, particularly if you went from a warehouse employee to our vice president in how many years?
A little over 4 years.
Yeah. And just the brutal honesty I gave you in the very beginning of what it was going to take and what I expected, and how you responded to that. Because and I think that is related to what we'll talk about, in a few minutes here on this episode. So glad to have you, Tone. You've been an integral part of this team from the beginning. For me, my name is Handlon. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Born Primitive. Midwest guy, grew up in Indiana. Grew up playing sports, football, basketball, baseball. It was a big part of my life growing up. Was kind of a serial entrepreneur at a young age as well. Starting around 6th grade, I started hustling, mowing lawns, and built a good little lawn mowing and landscaping business while I was doing sports. Was able to go to Yale University, played football, was a linebacker there, played 4 years, and then graduated, worked for Red Bull for 4 years, which was an awesome experience. I think that's where I kind of learned about brand marketing and what it, how to build a brand, because Red Bull is super unique in how they've been able to do that, particularly through content. Was able to go compete at the CrossFit Games, kind of stumbled into CrossFit as I was preparing for the military, as a way to prepare, to get conditioned for the military training I was going to. And so that was an awesome experience. That's kind of how I drank the CrossFit Kool-Aid. And that's where Born Primitive was born, was in a CrossFit gym, developing a pair of compression shorts that was a total fluke. And we'll do probably another podcast, on kind of the journey of in the story of Born Primitive. But Launched Born Primitive right as I was joining the military, which was horrible timing. But there's like anything, and there's never going to be perfect timing to do anything. Sometimes you just have to pull the trigger and go for it. And then, our co-founder Mallory, who, we were married at the time, took the reins as well, and was a dental hygienist. And, we just started hustling the first 5 years. It was just me and her, building Born Primitive out of the garage, and eventually took over the entire house. So that's the quick down and dirty on me. I just got out of the service a year and a half ago, did just under 8 years. And now we're full-time BP, rocking and rolling. So, Tony and I are by no means experts on any of this. We acknowledge there's still so much we need to learn, but we do have some life experiences that we think will be applicable to some of these topics. And then, like I said, we want to bring in, guests from various disciplines that have achieved success, and try to extract that common thread of what they've done to be successful. And, not having interviewed them yet, I do know that it's not going to be a big surprise, of what that is. And comes down to just good old fashioned hard work, right? And applying that to a specific discipline and goal. And, I think that's, for me, the first topic, I want to get into, Tone, because, as we look at today's society, from my optic, I think a lot of the hard work and kind of that scrappy mentality has eroded a little bit, and quite frankly, been replaced with a victim mentality that has almost been reinforced by certain entities and parents and, even teachers and stuff like that. So, I want to kick it over to you. The very first saying we ever had as a company, it went on our very first shirt ever back in 2014. It's, hanging up on the wall in my office right now, but on the back of it in super shitty font, it said "The hungriest man eats," with a period after it. And that to me was the embodiment of what we wanted Born Primitive to stand for, and what the mentality and ethos of the brand was all about. Because, quite frankly, we were living that in real time, trying to build a business out of a garage that was nothing, while being active duty. And Mal was a dental hygienist full time. I mean, you have to be a little nuts, and you have to work your butt off. So kick it over to you. What does that mean to you? How does that relate to what you've seen in your life? And what do you got?
Yeah, I think for me, it boils down to, and you're right, there are trends in current society, but I think this is something I think us as humans have battled with for way longer than the current state, for hundreds of years. And for me, it boils down to taking extreme individual responsibility for everything in your life. And that's not just the macro as far as like your career, your relationships. It's, to me, your day to day. And like I told you even before we were live, is like that the victim mentality to me isn't something I even like to point the finger and say, hey, look at how victimized our society is. It's like, even within my day, I can feel the pull of that in a relationship, to have a mentality of like, woe is me at times, or you go to do something in your morning or late in the evening and you really don't want to do it. The subtlety of what that mentality and how invasive it can become is insane if you really take the time to self-reflect. So for me, it's extreme ownership of your day to day, which I think leads to a macro environment in which you feel kind of responsible for in a productive way, as like, look what I was able to build because I took care of those small things. And that to me is the opposite of a victim. Is like, you never point the finger, you say, what can I do better? And it actually relates. And like you said, we'll do a podcast on kind of where I started in the warehouse, but that is a good example, because I felt that pull then of like, hey man, I'm making an hourly wage. Like, I feel like I could be doing so much more. And what I realize is, whoa, the more I buy into that, not only do I start to project that on the people around me, but it hinders the way in which I'm operating on a day-to-day basis here. So what was the opposite of that? The opposite of that was, what can I do every single day to make myself better and make this environment better? And that to me is a scalable thing, is where when you turn it into the individual of like, hey, you take care of your shit and watch how the ripples expand out from that. That's a powerful thing. So yeah, as soon as I hear that word, to me, it boils down to you as an individual, and then watching how that affects a group when you take extreme ownership for every part of your life.
100%. I think I do like the point you make, that this isn't just a societal thing, that this does creep into you internally, for the best of us that are savages, that like are all business and we get the fuck after it. Like we're all guilty of that. and knowing when that happens and kind of, you know, keeping yourself in check and saying like, hey, motherfucker, like, what are you doing about it? You know what I mean? Like,
100%.
you're not a victim either. If you're going to preach that, you better practice it. But, you know, I think for me, like the biggest thing that fires me up is, you know, there needs to be an acknowledgement that really anything worthwhile in life requires a ridiculous amount of hard work. And there's going to be a shitty period you have to go through until you get to where you want to be. Right. Because if it wasn't like that, and maybe there's a few exceptions, you know, if you inherit money or something, like, okay, maybe you can go buy a mansion and you don't have to do anything. But like, for the most part, my eyes, 99% of scenarios, anything that has an end state, you got to go through some shit to get there. Right. And I think a lot of people are not willing to go through that. And then there's this kind of victim mindset of like, oh, well, that guy was able to achieve this or she was able to achieve this. And like, that was unfair. And it's like, well, no, they went through, you know what I mean, the freaking inferno to get there.
Yeah.
And now they're, you know, they've made it. But, you know, they had to make a ton of sacrifices along the way.
What I think what's fascinating, at least in my experience, is individuals that have that mentality, it becomes less about the end state and more about who they are becoming throughout that process. And then, of course, and you know this, it's like things will come along with that. When you hold yourself to a high level of discipline and you show up every day, the results in your environment will change around you. But truly, and that's why, like, even if you mentioned somebody inheriting money, like I scoff at that, as in like, I'm so happy that didn't happen to me, because that doesn't build that internal fucking willpower that experience does. And when
100%.
when you hold yourself to that discipline, it's like that's sharpening your sword, and that's what becomes important. And then you realize like, oh, life is this long journey of me just digging up versions of myself that I'm ready to like grow out of. And discipline is one of the best, and I would say, yeah, one of the best ways to really sharpen your sword. And it becomes less about those external things, the end state, and more about just who you're becoming throughout that process.
No, absolutely. And you know, that's kind of something with, you know, building Born Primitive. I've experienced is like, you know, people make offhand comments of like, oh, it must be nice and this and that, you know, live on the beach and this and that. And it's like, you know, I try to hold my tongue, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, you have no fucking idea. Right. Like what it took especially the first 5 years before anyone else was a part of the company.
Yeah.
And you got boxes to the ceiling in every guest room in the house, and every waking hour you're free from your other job, you're doing Born Primitive. And then, you know, it leads to a divorce, and you know what I mean? Like it's paid for, you know what I mean? And it's not for everyone, and it's not this glamorous thing. And that's true for so many different things that people aspire to. You know, if you want to become a doctor, it's like, they're sleeping at the damn hospital for 3 years of their life, and they're doing school and they're studying their butts up. You know what I mean? So anything that there's like a mountain you got to climb, like you don't just get to the top of the mountain.
Hell
right?
no. And there's sacrifices too. Yes. And I think that like anyone that this shouldn't be a fluffy conversation of like, oh yeah, grind and be disciplined and things are going to be great. It's like, those are 100% components of this equation, or what I call life's equation. But there's going to be extreme sacrifices that are made throughout that process. And I think that's where like keeping people who have that experience, and also keeping friends close to you that grounds you, to say like, hey, if I'm ever too far off the rails, like please let me know, because this process is sloppy, man. In that process of like, when you dedicate so much time to something, there are other things that are going to lack in that process. And that's where it takes like, I think as you build your capacity, you do get better at kind of keeping at least like little fires going while you're really focused on something. But that's not easy to do. And that's building what I call like that's building your internal will and just your overall kind of capability to be able to keep those other fires going. Because, and I'm sure you could speak to it, it's so easy. And I think this is not that females don't feel this, but it's a very masculine trait to become super hyper focused on something and kind of put your blinders on to other peripheral things. And I know I felt that. And then now having a 15-month-old and in a relationship, like those things, like you can't do that anymore. So now you're juggling 5 balls, as opposed to when I was Tony at the warehouse, man, that shit was easy. I was working 12 hours a day, eating, lifting in the morning. Like that shit, as much as on the surface, it's like, oh, that must've been miserable. It's like, no, actually it was kind of, it was freeing, because I had no other responsibilities. Now I think it's on us too, as men, and just as like expanding your abilities, is to take on more responsibility. And as that happens, man, you're now juggling 6 balls as opposed to 2.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, you know, for maybe the younger people listening that don't have kids and, you know, spouses and all that shit yet. Like, in that window, get the fuck after
Yes,
it. Right?
100%.
That is the time to work late, get there early.
Be obsessed.
Go to the gym 2 hours a day, this and that, right? Because you have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm in the same boat. You know, I got a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And when I used to get home, it'd be like, all right, after the gym, it'd be eat real quick. I'd eat like a chicken breast and a sweet potato and broccoli, same thing every day because it took 2 seconds. And it's back on the computer. You work until midnight.
Yep.
And I was able to do that because, you know what I mean? I didn't have any other obligations, and that's what I was solely focused on. Now it's like I get home and it's like I gotta be a dad, which is great. So, you know, I've had to, you know, reel that in a little bit. So for the people that don't have those, you have honestly a huge advantage on you know, being able to pursue some of your ambitions that other people might have, you know, not be able to do it fully because of real and great obligations.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, obligation is probably a bad word. But I think you
just
hit the nail on the head
responsibility.
because I mean, I remember, you know, I didn't have a kid yet either. And you'd be in there like freaking sweeping the floors at 7 o'clock at night. And I was in the gym, like across the way, you know, getting after it.
Yeah.
And it'd be getting dark and you'd not be leaving. And you know what I mean? And it was like, all good. Like I'm going to go home and eat and start working again. You know what I mean?
And I think something I want to call out there, because this is something I actually like struggled with kind of right out of college, is you'd said like, hey, get after your ambitions. And it's like, and even if you're not clear on your ambition, just work your ass off in whatever environment you're in. Like that's something, looking back now, I became almost like I was overanalyzing what my next step was out of college. I realized, hey, I'm not doing med school, but then I was overthinking like, oh, I need to find the perfect place to get my first job, my perfect place to get my first internship. And now with the experience I had looking back, it's like, and Born Primitive was a huge teacher of this. It's like, just start anywhere and work your ass off every single day, because hey, even if you're there for 2 years and you hate that environment, build the skill set that is required to then go transfer that skill set to another environment. And that's like, that's almost like paralysis by analysis. And I had that of like, what is my ambition? It's like, no, just find somewhere that's somewhat reasonable to work in, where you think there's maybe a little room to grow, work your ass off. And then if you hit 2 or 3 years in, or even a year in, it relates back to what we said earlier. You're just building a skill set that can be transferred anywhere. So don't get too hung up on, oh, I need to know exactly what I want to do. It's like, hey, just start sprinting. And then as you build your skill set, you'll have the time to kind of step back and say, okay, I'm fucking exhausted. Maybe I shouldn't just dead sprint anymore. But you've built up the stamina to then take that and go and add value somewhere else.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, I want to segue a little bit. We kind of hit on the hard work, which is as simple as it gets. Work your butt off.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy. And eventually you will get to a place that you're happy.
Yeah.
And, you know, depending on what you're striving for.
I'd say fulfilled, not happy. Happy is a weird word. Fulfilled.
That's a good call. But, you know, the other thing I want to talk about, and this is such a big part of Born Primitive and something we preach to our employees, is like that victim mentality, because it is freaking cancer, right?
Yeah.
And it can bring you down to your knees if you buy into it in your brain. And also like the media, your parents, you know, maybe if you're in a bad friend group and they're reinstilling this conspiracy theory in your head that, oh, you know, I'm not supposed to be successful because those people are saying I shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a fair shot in this and that. And it's all fucking bullshit. You know what I mean? And I want to pull up a Ben Bergeron. I don't know if for those that follow him, I thought he put up a post the other day that was like spot on. It's really simple. I'm gonna read it. It says, nothing holds someone back more than seeing himself as a victim. Why? Because a victim is not responsible for his situation.
Yeah.
That is so spot on. I want to talk about that case study that I brought up in the team meeting the other day. And for those that have like know more of the nuances to this, I might butcher it a little bit. So I'm going to give the gist of it, but acknowledge that this is not like, I didn't read the full 40-page report, but the gist of it was they did a study with people that were going to go in for like a fake job interview. Mm-hmm. And they took half the group and they had makeup artists put blemishes on their face, and they had the other half just be normal. The people interviewing didn't know what was going on. So they wanted to, the people that were getting the blemishes put on their face, like measure how they felt the interview went, knowing they had these glaring, you know, things on their face that, you know, that might be perceived during the interview while they're being evaluated for to be a potential employee, right? And so right before the people went in, the makeup artist said, oh, we want to touch it up real quick. And what they actually did is they removed the blemishes, right? So these people went in, they didn't realize that their faces were totally normal again. There was nothing on their face. They thought they had these big marks on their face. Mm-hmm. They did the interview. they left. And then after the interview, they were basically filled out like a survey on like, how much did you feel like you were discriminated against, XYZ, you know, blah, 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 blah. And shocking, every person that thought they had a blemish on their face, maybe not every, but it was a unanimous statistical call out. Yeah. That all the people that went in thinking that there was going to be discriminated against because of like the you know, stuff on their face, perceived that in their post interview like analysis, right? The people that went in normal, of course, they did a normal interview, and guess what? The interviewers, they didn't know the difference because they were just in their mind, they were just interviewing people and grading them for a variety of skill sets. And you know what I mean? They didn't know the difference either. So of course there was no bias by the interviewers because everyone that went in looked normal. Right? Well,
and there's the power of the mind. You
exactly.
know what I mean? Like,
and that's the gist of it. And it's so critical for people to realize that it's almost like a confirmation bias. If you think you're a victim, you will find everything in your daily life that confirms that theory. Mm-hmm. It's like when you drive to work and you throw your hands up because you hit that red light every day and you're like, man, I always hit this red light. You actually don't. But when that light is green, you don't even notice it because you have the confirmation bias that that light always turns red and it's the longest light and this and that, and you get mad. And then you drive through green, you don't even notice. You listen to radio, you go through it. It doesn't even trigger in your brain. And that's confirmation bias. And the same thing happens with the victim mentality.
Well, yeah. And I think what relates to that, and I think every human being can relate to this, is that it's hard to deal with your own shit. So what's easier than dealing with your own shit? It's to project it out and say, oh, it's my circumstances, it's my environment that is prohibiting me from solving the things or figuring out the things or moving towards what I want to move towards. And of course, there are instances where that is the case, but it boils down again to like, usually in order to solve that, what has to happen? It's like, you have to get better. You have to shift your environment. You have to take action in order to change that. So I think it relates to what you just said. And I think once again, it's something even within myself and my day to day, you can feel is that it's so easy to point the finger out and say, it's kind of that woe is me, or like, it's because of this that I'm not succeeding. And I think the reason for that, at least in my opinion, is because it's fucking hard to deal with your own inner demons. You know what I mean? It's hard to make those changes. It is hard. Like, but there's where we said earlier, like to feel fulfilled as a human, I think you've got to get in the arena. You got to start battling those things internally, because what's fascinating about that is you'll start to see things shift around you. And then you realize that's what's empowering, is that like, oh, I have control over my environment, as opposed to, oh, I'm kind of just at the will of my circumstances.
Exactly. And it's got to be a mindset shift. And here's the thing. There are real circumstances where you are actually at a disadvantage. But the fact remains, having the mentality still, like, you should still take the mentality of F that. I don't care if I'm at a disadvantage. I'm going to outwork everyone, and they will have no choice but to put me in the game, or, you know what I mean? Hire me for this position, whatever it is you're going for. It's like, our service members that have like lost limbs and stuff in combat, those are some of the most inspirational people, because that's like a real bad break, right? Like, you can't acknowledge and you see so many of them that have, kind of taken this new mentality towards life. Hey, I'm not going to let the fact that I only have one leg stop me. I'm going to go run a marathon. I'm going to go do this. And it's like so inspiring to see those types of people respond to real adversity. That one could argue does put them at a disadvantage, right? And they totally reject the notion and they get after it. And I think that's important, like, particularly as we raise kids, right? And I think about this, Ren's only 2, but like as she gets older, it's like, and she's playing sports and this and that, as parents, how do we, obviously be loving and caring, but still kind of firm in a way that enforces hard values, so they're resilient later on in their life. And, like, to use the sports analogy, and I've told you this one before, but, in high school, there's, and what I'm getting at is I think your friend, as a parent, as a colleague, we have to be the gatekeepers of our own, the people that we are close to call them on their bullshit when this creeps in. So one example is like, high school football player, right? And this is kind of my world. This is, growing up, this was big. And, he's complaining to his parents because he's not playing because the coach's son is in his position, right? And, it's because it's the coach's son, yada, yada. And the parents are reinforcing this crap that, yeah, you're right, honey. It's unfair. You're, blah, blah, blah. When in reality, the coach's son is freaking getting after it every day, running gassers with his dad at night on the field, right? Working drills, working footwork, getting after it in the weight room, doing all the things you do to be a good football player, right? While This kid is freaking sitting in his basement eating Cheetos and playing GoldenEye, right? And all summer, and then he shows up for preseason camp in August, and he's out of shape and no good.
Yeah.
In his mind, I'm not playing because of it's coach's son. In reality, you let that mentality destroy you. You did nothing. You didn't apply yourself. And in reality, the coach's son is actually way better than you. And you know what I mean? And it's a complete, and for 4 years that's in his head. Oh, that's the only reason I'm not playing. And it's like, had that the parents been like, hey, what let's do some self-reflection. What are you actually doing to make this a competitive spot? You know 100%. What I mean? Or hey, maybe you switch to freaking defensive end. You come in, 220 pounds, Jack Steele, you know what I mean? And they have no choice but to play you now, right? Yeah. You say, all right, I'm not going to be a quarterback. Got it. I'm going to go to DN. I'm going to go linebacker and play tailback, whatever it is. And I'm getting real. I'm a football guy, Tone, so you got to bear with me. I'm always giving football analogies, but you know what I mean.
And that's the importance of, and you mentioned it right before you kicked off that story, is having those sounding boards, because now making sure that the sounding boards you're using are squared away in their own life is important too, because you'll get a shitty feedback loop if not. But that's like my friend group and of course my spouse and my parents at times, like leaning on them to, like, if you have an idea in your head, our mind can convince ourselves of anything, and it's subtle, and it can very easily build a victim story that allows you to have reasons why things aren't happening the way you want them. But if you run them by a trusted agent, a friend, a partner, and they truly love you and they give you that feedback that, like, hey, here's some things you're not looking at. And of course, don't hang your hat on one person's opinion, but have a group of 5 people, have 5 trusted people that you can run an idea or what you're feeling in your head by, and then take that feedback from those 5 people and take a hard look at it. And like that to me is as important what I'm thinking in my head. Now, like I said, you got to make sure those 5 people are squared away and trusted, but that's a great reflection of, oh shit, here are my blind spots. Here's what I'm not seeing. And of course, that doesn't mean you take everything they said and just do a 180. But like, I know some of my most vulnerable moments, but that have resulted in the biggest changes, were willing to kind of lay down on people that I knew loved me and say, hey man, here's the stories I got running in my head. What do you think? And to me, I call it like a software scrub. You end up you get some ideas back that allow you to kind of do a scrub of the stories you're telling yourself in your head. And that's powerful.
Yeah. I think it comes down to tough love.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We got to keep each other in check. And, some of my best mentors looking back, and these are mainly coaches.
Yeah.
The best ones were the ones that gave it to you real.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Hey, you're not fast enough. You're not big enough. This and that. And there was no, they didn't hold back. And it was brutally honest, and it's hard to take, when you're, 16 years old in high school. But that's what you need to hear in the moment.
For sure.
Rather than some sugar-coated version of why you're not playing or this and that.
Well, and you see that in the workplace too. Like, I mean, we both managed a ton of people, and the difference between individuals who take feedback and then run with it, as opposed to like take it and get offended and then kind of like, once again, create a story as to like, there's no way that's the truth. It's like the growth, kind of the exponential growth that happens when you, even if the person's off a little bit and their feedback maybe didn't land perfectly, it's like, as long as you're willing to take a hard look at that, like that will, the growth that will happen when you're willing to integrate that feedback, you skip 10 steps as opposed to trying to figure it out all in your head. So you're right. It fucking stings, man. That feedback stings, but it will result in growth that, like I said, it skips years of what you trying to figure it out all in your own head does.
Absolutely, man. Well, I think this was a good first topic to cover down. Obviously, Tone, this is an integral part of the DNA of Born Primitive.
Yeah.
As a company, we try to cut against the grain, and kind of throw that whole victim entitlement crap out the window. And we try to project that as, from our brand positioning and content, but also under this roof, and over at the warehouse, like with our employees. And it's awesome that everyone seems to buy into that, and we're all rowing in the same direction. So we're super stoked, guys. This is our first episode. Hope it gave you a little bit of value, and want to just frame up kind of what you can expect to see from us. We have some awesome guests coming on. We got Jack Carr will be one of our first guests. Best-selling author. And has done a ton of cool shit before that in his life. And then we got Rich Froning, the Michael Jordan of CrossFit. Obviously, a lot of you are probably tracking him. We'll be interviewing him in our 4th episode, and tons of stuff I want to get into with Rich. And there's actually a hilarious I'm going to put him on the spot.
Yeah,
There's something funny that, is totally all in good fun, but he does not know about that. I think will be really cool for the viewers, and him and I can laugh about it. We definitely want to hear from you. We want to be covering topics in areas of your life that you think will bring value. So definitely drop us a comment if you have ideas, if there's guests you want us to interview, or if there's questions. We'll probably do Q&A stuff as well. Maybe like once a month, we'll do a Q&A episode where we just go through various questions. And, Tony, I think we shotgun it. So I don't know what they are. And you put me on the spot and we just roll with it, keep it natural. We'll do our best to maybe, give you something to take away. To help us out, guys, if you can, please subscribe, like, comment, rate. All
the things that help us grow.
Particularly, early on, it's super critical for us to kind of get that engagement. So that would really, really help us. If you're a fan of the brand or just joining us, we would really appreciate it. And you can find us, Born Primitive. This will be on YouTube, and you'll see little clips of it on our Instagram and all of our social handles at Born Primitive. And then we have our Born Primitive podcast handle as well on Instagram. So if you want to see more content that's cut up from these episodes, there'll be definitely more there, but we'll also be putting kind of the greatest hits, if you will, if we had any greatest hits, I don't know, Tone, on our main pages. And then of course, if you want to watch the video, the full episode will be unedited on YouTube
and Spotify, Apple Podcast,
all the usual
spots.
All the search it and just engage it if you can. But I don't know, Tone, you got anything else for the crew?
I think one quick question for you before we close out, where we talked a lot about the victim mentality, kind of like values that have been a part of Born Primitive from the beginning. Really quick, were those something, did you, with your career in the military, football, kind of like Red Bull, did you continue to build that kind of from a base of experience, or was that something you feel like your parents and your dad kind of instilled at you at a young age, and it's kind of just was planted there and then has continued to grow as you've kind of evolved?
Yeah, I think it definitely started with the parents for sure. I was really lucky. My parents are awesome. They instilled a lot of good kind of values and, all about work ethic. Particularly, both of them, honestly. My mom would leave work at 5:15 in the morning, worked all the time. And my dad, had his own business. So he'd be the ones getting us ready for school and all that and making us breakfast. But he'd be the type that you'd get up on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock because you're a teenager, you sleep in, and he will have already mowed our lawn and no shit, the two neighbors' lawn. Like we had a couple old ladies that lived down the street. He would mow their lawn for free. So you'd wake up and he'd had grass all over his shins, and he will have already mowed 3 lawns and was like making breakfast. Yeah. So he set the tone, as my mom did, like I said. So it started there, and that was the kind of the expectation. We were expected to work hard, and we all 3 of my brothers, we all had lawn mowing businesses growing up. So I think that was a great kind of like, and they're push lawnmowers in like a hilly neighborhood. So it was not glorious. Yeah. It's 100 degrees out. You know what I mean? So it started there. And then I think so many lessons are learned in sports, and that's all we did. We were just, tournaments every weekend. You were the same way. You get
100%.
And, through that process, you come across great mentors. You learn structure in, just like, in weightlifting or strength training, it's like, you only get what you earn. If you want to be good, you have to practice and you have to put in the work.
Yep.
So, those were lessons that were kind of reinstilled in that environment. Particularly in high school, I had a really good mentor, Rich Wren, who was a hard-nosed linebacker coach, D coordinator, just old school guy that was just, he was a tough dude. And I learned so many lessons from him. And then in college, as you know, when you get to college, all the coaches, that's their full-time job. They're putting food on their family's table based on your performance on the field, which is a huge responsibility, but obviously they're all in, right? So, that's a 40, 50 hour week deal when you're a full-time Division I athlete. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Whole different ballgame. And so that's the next level. This is the real deal. They're bugging you, texting you, having you come watch tape in the middle of the day. You're trying to do schoolwork and all this. Yeah. That's their job. They have, so that was awesome to be in that environment. And then of course the strength and conditioning, like my coach, Emil Johnson, like that strength room, the strength and conditioning, like that was wild. You know what I mean? Going in there and just getting your soul crushed 4 or 5 days a week for 4 years. So it's like, I feel like everywhere I went in my life, I was in that environment where it was pressure, but like a good pressure, good, like it's good dude stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then same thing in the military. When I joined the military, it was exactly that times a million. And all those lessons, again, I think you continue to refine them, right? But like you have the foundation, but the more you're exposed to it, the better you get at it. And the more it's like ingrained in your brain is like, this is an unwaverable principle that like is now into my DNA. And anyone my kids and all, like, they're all gonna, that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to teach them because that's me now. You know what I mean? And now it's my turn to carry, carry that lesson forward for the people that I care about. So yeah, I think I got lucky. And I think, one thing on success is I think 80% of it is just surrounding yourself with the right kind of people. And I was fortunate, obviously, with my parents, not everyone has that. And so I think people need to find mentors, and then you immerse themselves in those environments if they didn't like inherit it. You know what I mean? Like if you don't have a strong family life, like find it elsewhere. Go join jujitsu. Even if you're 35, go join jujitsu, go do this, join a run, whatever it is. Yeah. And that you will start to become a product of your surroundings. And 80% of it is just showing up. Yeah. Right. So I don't know. I kind of went long on that.
No, that's good. And I agree. The subtlety of, that gets thrown around a lot. Like you are the 5 people you spend your most time around. And that seems like a cliche, but if the subtlety and the power of what surrounding yourself with the right people will do, it doesn't happen in a week. It doesn't happen in a month. It doesn't happen in 6 months, but over time, almost subconsciously, you start to mirror, I think, each other in a hopefully a positive way, or it can very easily be a negative way too, as far as like if you realize your deficits, if you have 4 people who are way ahead of you financially, relationship wise, like you will start to ask questions. And if not, you'll just start to watch them. And then over time, that will certainly close the gap between you and those individuals. And there's a ton of power in that. And like I said, that's a positive kind of framework for how that can go. There's certainly plenty of examples of negative frameworks where that can go too, where you're surrounding yourself with people that are kind of either a negative feedback loop for what you're doing, or may even be further down the road and will drag you into the hell. So yeah, that's 100% on the mark.
Yeah, it's like they say, if you become like the best guy in the room, you got to find a new room. You know what I mean? Yeah, so that's totally spot on. Yep. And yeah, man. All right. Well, good deal. Well, hey, I hope you all enjoyed that. Episode 1 in the books. Hopefully no edits. We didn't drink any alcohol. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, just coffee. I think, maybe a few of these episodes will spice it up. We'll do a 3 beer minimum. Maybe get into something real, if it's depending on the topic, we'll see, but we'll try to keep it PG. I told my mom I'd try not to swear. I think I probably violated that.
I think I swore more than you, which is that's good. That's abnormal.
It's probably, I did the cold tub before this, so I think it calmed me down a little bit. If you catch me right after, like if I come in here all sweaty wearing jorts and I just got out of the squat rack, like who knows what the hell I'm going to say.
Good Lord, we're in trouble.
Yeah, but maybe we should require that in a few of these episodes. But yeah, like we said, rate it and please comment. Let us know what you want us to cover. We're super excited to get this going. We're going to try to have weekly episodes coming out, hopefully dropping them on like Fridays. I feel like that's a good day. Yep. And thank you guys so much for listening.
Thanks, guys.